I bought my first camera in 2020, the Fujifilm X-T200. I was very happy with that camera until I found out there is something called log profile footage and which can be much beneficial while color grading. Then I was a little bit disappointed. But fast forward to 2023, I bought this camera, the Sony a7 III, and I was very happy until I found out there is something called 10-bit footage, which can be much more beneficial in terms of quality of footage, more information, and color grading. Then I was a little bit disappointed. And it is not just me, I know multiple other people who regret the first camera that they bought. They always think about, oh, this camera could have been better, but I did not have enough knowledge about cameras back then. So I want this video to be that exact goldmine of knowledge that you need to know before deciding which camera to buy as your first camera. Now, fair disclaimer, this video is not about how to use a camera. This video is not about which exact camera you should buy in your price range. This video is about educating you towards the complete understanding of the different things that are present inside a camera and outside the camera as well, both mechanical, technical, feature wise. What are the things that you should consider when you're buying your first camera so that it fits perfectly towards that kind of work that you do. So first things first, we are going to talk about the types of cameras. So the first things first, we're going to talk about the different types of cameras. One type of camera that you have definitely heard of is the DSLR. This we have definitely heard in our childhood, and honestly it is an obsolete thing. Nobody uses DSLRs anymore, but just to set the record straight, I'm going to explain it to you. In a DSLR, it has a mirror that rotates, that basically comes from this position to this position, and all the light that falls on that mirror reflects back onto the sensor. This is the sensor, right? And that is how the photo is taken. Whenever light falls onto the sensor, a photo is generated, an image is generated, right? And then there is the other type of cameras which are much more popular now, is called the mirrorless cameras. In its name, as it says, there is no mirror. The light falls directly onto the sensor. Now, because there is no mirror, these cameras can be much more physically compact in size compared to the DSLRs and less heavy. So basically, if you're looking for a camera to buy in 2024 or 2025, do not buy a DSLR. It's something absolutely not used these days. But inside of mirrorless cameras, there are still two different types. One is full frame and the other is APS-C, also known as the crop sensor, right? So this is what a camera sensor looks like. Whenever light falls onto this camera sensor, an image is generated. So whenever this sensor creates an image, and if we actually use that whole sensor image as the output of the camera, we call it a full frame sensor, and the camera is called a full frame camera. Whereas if for some reason, due to some aberration, chromatic aberration or stretching, for any reason, the edges of this particular image that is created by the sensor is not perfectly fine, they're not as the real life, we will often crop out a center part of that particular whole image and use that as the output. And when that is used in a camera, that is called a crop sensor, because we crop a part of the sensor and only use that part of the image as the output. It is also called an APS-C, but yeah, crop sensor is probably a better representation. And it is also very evident that full frame sensors are more expensive, making the full frame cameras also more expensive compared to crop sensor cameras. And when it comes to talking about the image quality, what is the difference in the actual video or the photo that is taken in a full frame versus a crop sensor, is that there is higher sense of depth, higher information of color, higher information of every single detail, more in full frame sensors, because it is a bigger sensor that is working. As simple as that. Bigger the sensor, more light falls onto it, and more information, more depth is actually transmitted to our actual footage. Perfect. Getting that out of the way, I also want to talk about that you guys might be expecting me to talk about camera brands, like which brand you should start off with as your first camera. Now, I'll be completely honest, I have only used one Fujifilm camera, that is the X-T200, and I've used quite a few different Sony cameras, but I have not used many Nikon and Canon cameras, so I cannot really comment on those brands. But this video, as again, is not about camera brands. It is to understand the different things about camera, different features, mechanical features, and also the features that are like basically specifications. So, but as I said, this video is more about educating you towards the different things about a camera. I'm not going to talk much about camera brands, but if you are a beginner looking at the industry and looking at different people using different cameras, I can almost certainly say that buying a Sony camera is probably the best bet in terms of the price range. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's talk about resolution and megapixel. Now we all understand what resolution is. If this is an image, it is actually made up of a lot of pixels. A full HD image has 1920 pixels wide and 1080 pixels in height. Now this is called a full HD or 1080p. There is also 2K, there is 4K, 8K and much more than that. So generally what we need in our camera, our first camera, we should always look for 1080p, at least shooting at 60 FPS, and 4K. There should be 4K capability because in 2024 even your phone camera can shoot 4K. Maybe the quality is not that good, but you should really have 4K, even if it is at 24 FPS. If you have 60 FPS, if you have 4K 60 FPS, it's even better. But yeah, at least go for this much. Now coming to talking about megapixels, this is something that is misunderstood by a lot of people. People think better megapixel means better camera. Not always. This is the Sony FX3, which is a 3.5 lakh rupees camera and arguably one of the best cameras available in the sub 5 lakh range. This has a 12 megapixel sensor, whereas this camera, which is Sony ZV-E10, a 60,000 camera, has a 24.2 megapixel sensor. So yes, technically megapixel still shows how sharp an image is going to be, but other than that, the image quality or how good the image looks or the video looks is not really going to be related to megapixel. And because whenever we go for a filmic look or videography look, if you're not shooting commercials, generally a very softer tone is appreciated. That is why we don't need a 48 megapixel camera, because you all often see that your phone might have a 40 or 50 megapixel camera, but your camera, your actual professional camera, takes a much better image. That is why do not really worry about megapixels, look at everything else. Okay, with that out of the way, we also need to talk about camera types. Now you might be thinking, we already talked about camera types. Okay, that was different. That is the mechanical type of cameras. In this, I'm going to be talking about the usage. There are different types of cameras particularly made for different types of usage. So what are the different types of usage? Generally, I'm going to be talking about photography, videography, then there is vlogging, there is filmmaking, and then there is also a beginner range. Almost every brand will have different, almost every brand will have different line of cameras for these different ranges. I don't think anyone other than Sony has a vlogging range. That is something that Sony does. So in terms of Sony, I'm only going to talk about Sony in this part because I know the names of those cameras. For photography cameras, you can find the A7R, and for videography cameras, you can find the A7S, right? So basically the camera names for photography will be A7R2, A7R3, A7R4. For videography, it will be A7S3, A7S4 and something like that. For filmmaking, it goes as FX, FX30, FX3, FX6, all of those things. For vlogging, it is ZV. And for beginners, it was generally Alpha 6X100. It will be 6100, 6200, 6300. These are like generally sub 1 lakh range. The latest one is, I guess, Alpha 6700, which is a pretty good camera, which is a crop sensor, but pretty good camera. In the photography section, this R stands for resolution, because in photography, you actually need a higher megapixel sensor and you need all the sharp edges and everything, because for like product photography or anything related to food photography, these things are very, very important. That is why it is called A7R. R is for resolution. And for videography, S stands for sensitivity. I'm just writing sensi here, but it stands for sensitivity. Why? Because for a video camera to be called good and an all-rounder, it needs to be very good, or at least considerably good, at low light conditions. And Sony's videography range cameras like the Sony a7S III are really good at shooting at low light. And what is also analogous to low light, you have to shoot at a very high ISO. ISO is technically the sensitivity of your sensor of the camera. That is why A7 sensitivity. Right, then we will talk about the vlogging cameras. Like the most popular examples are ZV-1, ZV-E10, then there is ZV-E1, and these are mainly vlogging cameras because they are made compact in size. There is no viewfinder, there is one flip screen, but they are very compact in size. You can almost fit them in your pocket with the kit lens. Then there are the beginner cameras. I already talked about them, not going to go much deeper into them. If you are buying a camera these days, I would not recommend a beginner camera because vlogging cameras generally have a lot more features for a similar price range. So yeah, nobody is really buying the beginner cameras unless someone is very much into photography and they need a viewfinder. I'm going to talk about all of those things, flip screen, viewfinder, later in the video, but let's just wrap it up with filmmaking cameras, the FX30, the FX3, and the FX6. These are all below, I guess, 7 lakh range. FX30 comes around 1.5 lakhs, FX3 comes around 3.5 lakhs, and FX6 comes around 6.5 lakhs. So I'm not expecting anyone to buy an FX3 or an FX6 as their first camera. FX30 is definitely possible, but you should also know what makes these cameras different. Now, a sensor is not the only thing that actually makes a camera different or unique. How the sensor information is processed also makes the camera different. For the cinema line cameras, these are the for Sony, these are called the cinema line cameras. All these filmmaking line cameras, FX30, FX3, they have a very filmic color science. Color science is basically how the colors are retrieved. So color science is basically how the colors will appear from coming to, and color science is basically how the colors will appear after coming from the sensor to the actual output image. Other than that, the sensors are often pretty similar. Like FX30 and ZV-E10 share the same sensor. FX3 and ZV-E1 share the same full frame sensor. FX30 is crop sensor, by the way, so is ZV-E10. And there is another new camera called the ZV-E10 Mark II, right, which is a very new camera, and I'll talk about it later. But if you are looking for a sub 1 lakh range camera for very versatile work, probably the best camera in the market right now. But okay, we understand that. Let's move on to something called color, right? Color bit or color depth, whatever you want to call it, but let's just call it color. So this is one of the biggest regrets that I have after buying this Sony a7 III, is that I found out this is an 8-bit camera. There is also a 10-bit camera variations. 10 bits are considerably more expensive for obvious reasons. But if you are a beginner, you do not need a 10-bit camera. 8-bit is perfectly fine when you are buying your first camera. But what does it mean? So every single pixel, as I said, every image is built up of pixels, right? So every single pixel, this is a pixel, okay? And this pixel holds 4 different information. The R value, G value, B value, and a gamma value. The gamma defines how bright the pixel is, and the RGB values are 3 different values of red, green, and blue, because every single color that you see is a combination of 3 different colors, RGB. So here in 8-bit footages, R can take a value from 0 to 255. Same for G, same for B. So this basically can take 256 different values, which is 2 to the power 8. G can also take 2 to the power 8 different values. B can also take 2 to the power 8 different values. So there are, how many combinations are there? How many colors can we actually get? It is approximately equal to 16.7 million different colors. Now that sounds like a lot, but when I tell you what 10-bit is capable of, you'll understand. For people who are good at maths, you already know how big this number is going to be. So RGB and gamma, R can take 2 to the power 10 values, G can take 2 to the power 10 values, and B can take 2 to the power 10 values. We multiply all of them up to get the total amount of different colors that are possible, and this goes above 1 billion. So more than 1 billion different colors, and that is why there is less banding in 10-bit footages. Now, what is banding? I'm not going to go in depth. Basically, your color does not break much because in 8-bit footage, there will be sometimes a lack of transitional color between two different colors. Like here is one color, here is the second color, but there are a few pixels which are between them. But because it is 8-bit, that particular color is not available. That is why there will be a sharp edge between these two colors, which does not look good. It makes your footage look more choppy, and yeah, it's not something that you want. But again, when you're starting out, 8-bit is absolutely fine unless you are pushing the color grade to an extreme level. Your footage is not going to break, it is going to be absolutely fine. So I'm just getting you to get all the perspectives so that you can make a better decision. Now, color, only the 8-bit, 10-bit is not the only thing. Just for reference purposes, there is also 12-bit cameras, there is also 16-bit cameras, but those are very, very expensive and actually used in like Hollywood or Bollywood movies. Next, I also want to talk about color spaces. So color spaces is basically how the RGB values are stored as numbers, right? And I am not trying to go very mathematical into this. If you want to know the complete mathematics of how these color spaces work, what is color space transform, what are different color spaces, which is narrow, which is wide, I can make a whole mathematical video on color spaces. If you want me to do that, let me know in the comment below. I'm an engineer at the end of the day. But yeah, keeping it very, very simple, all the color space that you see on your screen right now, on TV, on movies, anywhere, it is actually the color space called Rec 709. This is the standard media color space. But there is another color, there are actually a lot of different color spaces, but there is one called the log or the logarithmic color space. So basically, to put it into very simple words, is that Rec 709 can store this much of color information, whereas log can actually store this much of color information. And not just color, it can also store gamma information. But in color spaces, yes, it can only technically in color spaces it only stores color information, more color information, and in gamma space it stores more gamma information. So basically, more overexposed footages can be saved, more lower exposed footages, underexposed footages can be saved, colors can be pushed to a lot more extreme, and it just gives you more flexibility. So whenever you're buying your first camera, if you are more into color grading, if you want to color grade your footages at all, do try to look for a camera that can shoot log. But other than that, if you don't color grade your footages much, if you're just going to vlog or if you're just going to shoot talking head, it's not that important, right? Alright, so we understand that. Now I'm going to talk about a few important features that you should look for. So number one is a viewfinder. Do you really need a viewfinder? I personally do not think that anyone needs a viewfinder anyway these days, because the LCD screens are so advanced and so efficient. I don't think you need a viewfinder unless you are doing dedicatedly photography in harsh lighting situations. Other than that, less of, because if your camera does not have a viewfinder, it is generally a lot more compact in size, easier to carry, easier to handle, all of that thing. Right. Second thing that you need to take care of is the flip screen. If you are a photographer, you generally don't need a flip screen, but if you are a videographer, you may also not need a flip screen. But if you are a solo creator, however, you absolutely need a flip screen. That is regret number 2 for buying the Sony a7 III. It does not have a flip screen. So yeah, if you are a solo creator, get a camera with a flip screen. That way you will be able to see what you are shooting while you are in front of the camera. Perfect. Now 3 is actually battery life, and I'll write 4 right away, is overheating. Now battery life and overheating, your preferences should not just be, oh, I want the maximum battery life, maximum overheating, not overheating capability like that. It should be around what your work is. If you are a photographer, you probably need a high battery life, but overheating is not a problem for you, because overheating generally happens when you're in a really hot climate and you're shooting video, right? So understand that according to your usage. If you're going to shoot podcast, you need good battery life, you need very good heating, what should I say, should I call it less overheating? Yeah, less overheating problems. So these are things. So 1 and 2, these 2 things you can find on any page, like on the any buy page, Amazon, wherever you're finding the camera, you can find all these details of whether it has a viewfinder or a flip screen. You can just literally look at the camera and tell. But for these 2 things, you will have to go to forums or Reddit to find out other people's experience, because no actual camera company will tell you, oh, this camera has an overheating issue. You will have to talk to actual users or find reviews of people who have actually used the camera to find out whether your camera has a battery life issue or an overheating issue. Now, I think that almost covers everything that you need to know about the camera body. Be very specific, camera body, that you need to understand before buying your first camera. But there is another thing that is very important that a camera body cannot function without, and that is a lens. Right? So there are obviously questions about lenses, a bazillion of them. The first one being, should I take the kit lens that is given with the camera or should I buy a different lens? So if you know what you're doing, you already know which lens to buy. But if you are a complete beginner buying your first camera, you do not understand lenses, you do not understand cameras much, go with the kit lens, because that is the lens the camera manufacturer is telling you to use, because kit lenses are generally very versatile. It has a zoom ring, you can work with different situations. It is not particularly best at anything, but it is considerably good at everything. But other than that, if you're looking to upgrade your lens later on according to the kind of work that you do and you want to understand lenses better, like here is a lens, what are these different numbers, right? What are these different numbers? What are these numbers? How do I differentiate between these two lenses? And what are these rings over here? And are any of these rings very special? I can talk all about lenses and filters and how to understand the numbers written on them and how do you purchase the best lens and filter for your particular work. I can talk all about that in another video. So if you want that video to be made, let me know in the comments below and I will deliver very, very soon. As you have seen, this channel is pretty consistent right now. So yes, I hope we learned a lot of things from this particular video. If you want me to make a video about the best camera to buy in every budget range, I can make that as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching. I really appreciate it. And we are trying to hit 20k subscribers as soon as possible. So you can hit the subscribe button to help the channel out. It really, really means a lot. And thanks a lot for watching once again. I'll see you in the next one.